Thank you for joining us. You are a part of an elite group who recognizes that Black women's health should be at the forefront of the national conversation. We are mothers, daughters, activists, entrepreneurs, entertainers, corporate warriors, and more, who help boost the economy and often drive the national conversation. For 38 years, the Black Women's Health Imperative has strived to amplify our voices, help enact policy that protects us, research our issues, create programs that enhance our lives, and produce events like this one to ensure we keep the conversation going about the issues that matter to us most. So, let's get started with our program.
Good evening. We gather together for the health of Black people, that we may do more than survive, that we may be able to fulfill our potential and be healthy in body and mind and family and community. I am Monica Gail Coleman, and I am the Chief Communications Officer at the Black Women's Health Imperative. Those powerful words were spoken by Dr. June Jackson Christmas at BWHI's first formal gathering, and the goal stated then remains the same today. As an organization, we are committed to addressing the most pressing issues impacting our nation's 22 million Black women and girls, which has been our mission since day one. We do this each day with pride, with commitment, with innovation, and most importantly, with urgency. This week, we are excited to commemorate our 38th anniversary and look forward to a week of programming designed to amplify what it means to be Black and well. We'll have solution-oriented conversations about common challenges. We'll celebrate Black women, we'll introduce new tools, and much more. I hope that you will join us past this evening. However, this evening, our opening session is bound to set a powerful tone for our week-long celebration as we welcome a dynamic and iconic group of speakers. I am honestly honored to share space with each of them tonight. First, we will hear from Billie Avery, the founder of the Black Women's Health Imperative. I have learned that it is impossible to discuss any aspect of reproductive justice for Black women and not acknowledge her countless contributions. Her work, encouragement, and guidance has empowered women in this space for decades, and we are grateful to still have her with us as one of our esteemed board members. Welcome, Billie.
Thank you.
And we also have with us Professor Angela Davis, an icon and an inspiration to so many as the cornerstone of the Black feminist, civil rights, and social justice movement, both domestically and abroad. I am truly honored, Professor Davis, and I welcome you as well. So good evening to both of you.
Good evening.
So I know that you two have history, of course. Billie, do you want to just give us a little bit of your history with Professor Davis?
Oh my goodness. Okay, well, we go back a ways to the 80s when we was all so pleased to have Angela join us at many of our conferences and meetings. She was a board member for several years. When she came, she gave us the best compliment in the world. She brought her mother. And her mother enjoyed those meetings, and we enjoyed having her. So she has been absolutely right on the forefront and right out there with us all the way from the beginning. And we are honored. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. So I'll ask you both. 38 years ago, I know that in some ways, this nation was not much different, I would assume, than it is now. But when you started the imperative, it was because the needs of Black women were not being met. And what are some of the parallels that you see from 38 years ago to now?
Well, a lot of things that, 38 years ago, we Black women were participating in what we call a conspiracy of silence. We did not talk about our health. We didn't talk about, that was our business. We didn't talk about emotional, our physical well-being or anything. We were then affected, as of now, by racism, by poverty, by a lack of accessibility and availability to good health care, We have a healthcare system that focuses on treatment rather than prevention. It doesn't make all this healthcare accessible. That health at that time was not viewed at all through the lens of ethnicity. And all of the research was done on white men, by white men, about white men. And they were just applying that to us. And women were just small people, like adult children, in other words. Everything was done by them. We were not active participants in our healthcare. We were really more passive receivers. And doctors were looked upon as being what we call the M-deity. They were the gods of all of the healthcare. And we were not engaged with them. But now some of those challenges still remain. We're still dealing with racism, poverty, discrimination, lack of access to healthcare. And for a country that touted itself as having the best healthcare system in the world, look at where we are now with this pandemic, when we cannot, you can't get a grip on it, and because we don't have access to care. It really has poked holes and brought forth all of the things that are not working for us. We still are addressing the issues of physical, emotional abuse, things that happen to us just because happen to us in our homes and in our communities, just because we are Black and female. And but one of the things that we have done is we have learned how to listen, how to talk to each other, how to listen, and how to trust. So we trust Black women. We know what the answers are. We are the affected population, and we know what the answers are. So as we face those challenges, we have to look at them. We're working hard not to reduce Black maternal mortality. Why are Black women dying in childbirth? Why is that happening? And we applaud the work of the Black Mamas Matter. Yeah, Black mamas do matter, just like everything else. And then our healthcare system, we need to, while we have this hiatus with this pandemic and this election coming up, we need to look at reshaping our healthcare system. We have what Dr. Jocelyn Elders called a sick care system. And we need to move toward a healthcare system. And these are the challenges that face us now.
And so, Professor Davis, in keeping with what Billy is saying, I know that you've talked a lot about the link between capitalism and racism. And I'd love to hear your perspective on how you believe that has an impact on our healthcare system and the quality of health that Black women are receiving.
Well, first of all, let me say what an honor it is to have been invited to participate in this program on the National Black Women's Health Imperative, becoming a member of the National Black Women's Health Project in 1985. Yeah. I think that was Billy.
Yes.
Was really a critical moment in my own personal and political life. So I would like to thank Billy Avery for her brilliant leadership, for changing the terrain of health advocacy, of the reproductive rights movement, feminism more broadly, and I could continue to sing Billy's praises, but I'm afraid I would take up all of the time allocated for this program. So to respond to your question, capitalism has always been racial capitalism, as Cedric Robinson argues. Slavery, that is to say, unpaid labor provided the original capital. Many of the social problems we face today are linked to the fact that profit is the driving force of economic development, not human need. This is, of course, true of housing and education, and it is certainly true of healthcare. This pandemic would not be what it is today if our healthcare system did not operate under the dictates of capitalism. The current conjuncture emerged in part because of the rising awareness of structural racism. So when we say Black Lives Matter, we're not only talking about Black people, we're talking about the state of the country and the state of the world. If Black lives are ever recognizing as lives that matter, this will mean that all lives matter. And more specifically, when Black women experience justice, equality, and freedom in relation to the healthcare system, that will mean that we will have a healthcare system that responds to the health needs of everyone. In other words, Black women's health is a driving force of democracy.
Definitely. And as you talk a little bit about things that have, been exposed, we obviously see that there's social unrest, rightfully so. And in the midst of that, there are cries to defund the police in communities across America. And some people don't understand what that means. And so for those people, they have these fears of lawlessness and a decrease in public safety. In your opinion or in your thoughts, what is the connection you feel between public safety, public health, and increased funding for mental health or communities that could potentially result from defunding the police?
Well, I would say that the demand to defund the police is very similar to the demand over 150 years ago to abolish slavery. There were many people who were unable to imagine a world without enslaved Black people. But the most important point is that the negative demand requires us to think about how we can imagine new institutions, new ways of guaranteeing safety and security. And let me say that people miss the point around the abolition of slavery. It was negatively abolished, but society was not, new institutions within society were not created so as to be able to incorporate those who had been previously enslaved. So the point is that the demand to abolish the police or defund the police, it's an abbreviated call for new approaches to health and security. Why is it that a person who may have mental or emotional challenges and is experiencing an episode cannot expect a response from a health professional or a community activist who has experiences addressing these problems? Why is it that a person with a gun, a taser, and a billy club is sent to address a person in crisis? How many Black women in crisis have been killed by the police because they were perceived as threats? So I think it's important for us to ask, why is it that our first impulse when something is out of order is to call the police? Why is it that when a Black girl in a classroom who refuses to relinquish her cell phone, why is she assaulted by a police officer? They call them school resource officers, and basically arrested. That is why there is a demand to get police out of school. So it's not only defund the police, it is about imagining new and better ways of addressing the very meaning of safety and security. And I think that the lynching of George Floyd and the racist murder of Breonna Taylor allowed us to see very clearly the structural racism of policing and consequently the need to re-envision the very meaning of what it means to be safe and secure.
Absolutely. And as we talk about, and this will be my last question before we bring our next guest and bring you ladies back later in the broadcast. As we talk about re-envisioning and reimagining, and I'll pose this to both of you, COVID-19 has definitely had an impact on life as we know it and perceived systems and things that we thought worked. And we're having to figure out new ways, whether it's around educational systems, around healthcare or spiritual systems, or just being present. And so how do you think these uncertain times give us a chance to reimagine what community means to us as Black people in this season?
I think that it gives us time to make changes. It gives us time to take care of ourselves, to take time for ourselves, to think about how we're going to survive this, that we have to get to the other side of it. And self-care is just really, really important. We have to take care of ourselves. And we should use this time now to practice that. For those of us who are not doing it, use this time. Take an hour every single day just for you to do nothing but take care of yourself. Um, Order flowers. Have flowers in your life every day. Think positive thoughts about yourself. I have listed 10 things to do that's called Billyisms. And these are things that you should do for self care. Take an hour for yourself. Know that no is a complete sentence. Um, get fresh flowers in your life. They're listed on our website. You can go and look at all 10 of them. And you just put yourself in the front row seat of your life. Get the negative people out of the front row seat of your life. You don't need to listen to them. You don't need to hear anything from anybody telling you you are not this, you are not that, you are not that. You are all of that. Surround yourself with the positive. And we have to take care so that we can last and be here for the whole haul.
Right. Professor Davis, any thoughts there?
Well, I totally agree with everything that Billy has said. And, you know, at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, I was watching a webinar with Arundhati Roy. And what she said was that we shouldn't simply wait for the coronavirus to subside so that we can return to normal, go back to normal, but rather that we should see this pandemic as a portal that allows us to envision new potentialities. And we've seen the millions of people who have gone out into the streets, standing up against racism. That has to mean something for the future. And I totally agree with Billy that we need to incorporate our awareness of the importance of self-care into the work that we do to guarantee that on the other side, there will be substantive changes, but there should also be substantive changes in our lives. We should be I've been trying to do yoga or Pilates every single day. I've been, following Billy, taking time out for and I don't want to say myself individually because I feel connected to other people. And I think that this call for self-care should be a collective call, and it should be work that we incorporate into our organizations and into our political work. That's what's so exciting about the new generation of activists. They have learned from Billy Avery. They have learned how to incorporate self-care into the very process of organizing and struggle.
Yeah.
Well,
there's a reason
both.
why we're having this. There's a reason why this is happening. This did not just come from out of nowhere. Understand, this is happening because we need to reset. We need to recalibrate. We need to rethink. We need to figure out how to do things differently. And so we need to use this time to that advantage.
Well, thank you both for this powerful first segment. I will be bringing you both back on shortly. We've gotten a little bit of history on BWHI, where we've come from, and now we're going to learn where we are with our current president and CEO, Linda Gola Blount. This is my boss, everybody, so I'm going to be even more excited. And she is an epidemiologist, so that is a great thing because it really speaks to the work that we do is data driven. And so, Linda, welcome.
Well, thank you. It's actually fabulous to be on this side, so I really appreciate it, and you're doing a fantastic job.
Well, thank you. So I know one of the things that you always say, Linda, is that when you got this job, Billy told you that this was a very powerful role and it was a very important job. And so as you lead, the only national organization that is focused on Black women's health, I'd love to know, what are your top 2 or 3 goals that you direct and lead and guide your team towards each day?
Yeah, it's really interesting to sort of reflect back on that conversation, because it was shortly after I took the job, and Billy was very serious, and she said, this is a very powerful position, and I have to say, in all honesty, my thought was, yeah, okay. I mean, I've run really big organizations, 9-figure budgets, hundreds of staff. It's like, okay, I get it. And shortly after we had that conversation, I went to a few reproductive justice meetings and rights meetings and met with some members of Congress and the Congressional Black Caucus. And there was sort of a moment, there was an effort underway shortly after I started to raise the age of screening mammography from 40 to 50. And so I was, meeting with folks, testifying, obviously looking at the research. I must have been in 30 meetings that year. And I was always the only Black woman in the meeting. And we were the only Black organization in that conversation. And in the end, we were able to get the legislation passed that prevented that from happening, because had it happened, another 1,300 to 1,400 Black women would have died every year from breast cancer. And that's when I think it really hit me, when I understood what Billy was talking about. So it wasn't power, it was responsibility, and the power that comes with the responsibility, that Black women were listening to the Black Women's Health Imperative. They were looking to this organization for guidance, for information, for strategies, for tools, for leadership, so that they could be as healthy as they could be, to break down those barriers. And when I think about power, I think about the power that comes with the leadership of kind of how we leverage the media to tell the story of our power, to tell the story of why we are CDC's #1 top performing grantee for diabetes prevention, why we reached almost 2 million women with our HIV prevention messaging, why our presence on college campuses and high schools, in high school classrooms for leadership building is so important, and frankly, why members of the House and Senate seek us out. So the power is in our partners and knowing where we put resources in communities to get the work done. So as I kind of think about that, we have to keep doing what we're doing. A dear friend of mine recently was asking me a similar question about my vision for BWHI. And I said, well, what we need to do is take what we're doing to scale. And so he said, why don't you? And I said, well, I need a much bigger budget. If I had the budget, I would do that. We need to be a $25 million shop. And he smiled at me, and much like Billy looked at me when we had that conversation about power, he said, yeah, I don't think Fannie Lou Hamer ever said I could solve this whole voting rights thing if only I had the budget.
Wow.
So it's like, okay, I get it. So I'll get the resources that we need to take what we do to scale, to run interference for this incredibly powerful, talented team I get to lead, to get to health equity for Black women, to change our experience with the medical system, and frankly, to create that space of justice where Black women and our lived experiences are incorporated in everything that is done in science, in program, in medical care, to make sure that we achieve our physical, financial, and emotional wellness, because we ought to and we deserve to be Black and well.
Right. And we talk a lot internally about changing the narrative. I know that is important to you, of course, in the work we do on the communication side, but in general. So what do you feel has been the narrative, and to you, what should that change be? Because the disparities that we're fighting are real. They're not imagined. The data shows that. But how do you feel they should be presented in a way that is still empowering and celebratory, if you will?
Yeah. So this is a bit of a challenge, and people in my profession spent a lot of time talking about data. And when you think about COVID-19, we're hearing a lot about when we can get the data by race, by ethnicity, but it's always from a perspective of what's wrong. We, people in public health, lead the viewers who don't, and listeners who don't really understand and look at data every day, that to believe that Black women have higher maternal mortality rates or die more from breast cancer or have obesity rates because we're Black. And that is not it at all. So what the Black Women's Health Imperative started doing probably 5 years ago is talking about the lived experiences of Black women. This is 400 years of oppression that we've been having these conversations, and Black women live at that intersection of racism, gender discrimination, and classism. And so that's the place where we're blamed always, where something's always wrong. But we know, and Monica, you know, from our survey that Black women don't view themselves as broke or broke down. And when we conducted that survey a few years ago and found out how Black women really define health, it allowed us to completely change our approach to our work from an asset perspective, asset based. We start with, how do you feel? What does it mean to be a Black woman in this society and this time? And we use that to frame all of our work. Our incredible messaging, our policy work, our program work always starts from a position of strength and asset. And what's really gratifying is we're seeing other people pick that up and start talking about the lived experiences of Black women and what that means in the work, and move away from this deficit perspective that something is wrong with us simply because of the disparities and inequities that exist, that of course are not our responsibility.
Right. Well, thank you, Linda. We will bring you back as well. We are going to go to our next guest. Her name is Kimberly Foster, so I'd love to bring Kimberly up. Kimberly is a writer, cultural critic, and founder and editor-in-chief of For Harriet, which is a platform known for celebrating the fullness of Black womanhood. To me, she is a voice that I can always count on to click on her button and say, ooh, she really said that. And I appreciate you, Kimberly, for always speaking truth to power and just living in your truth. So thank you and welcome. And I'm glad that you were able to join us. Oh, you're still muted.
That's not.
Oh, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it enormously.
Sure. So, Kimberly, I know we look to you as the future, the now and the future of Black feminism and what that means. And so some say the future is female. And what does that term mean to you as it relates to impacting and advancing liberation in the Black community? And as you heard from our CEO, you know, what are your thoughts about organizations like ours and others in the space, you know, supporting women in that movement?
Yeah, I agree. I believe that the future is female. I also believe that it's non-binary. I believe that it's gender non-conforming. I do believe that if we commit to creating a world where we don't have to be subject to so much violence, both interpersonal and structural. And by the way, structural violence looks like many different things. It looks like lack of access to healthcare. It looks like failing schools, deteriorating schools. It looks like our criminal legal system that is so incredibly biased. If we commit to struggling together on an equal playing field, and if we commit to investing in each other in a different world, then we no longer have to live lives that are overdetermined by the various forms of violence. So I absolutely believe deeply in the work that you're doing. I think that right now we're settling, and I appreciate that this organization is working towards something different, something new.
Sure, thank you. I think one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, because I know you do a lot in the digital space, and so this current movement that we're in, I think it feels a little bit different because some of the players are not the typical players. They're not the typical people who have always been quote unquote woke, right? But I feel that in the midst of that, we've seen some divisiveness where there is an established level of quote unquote wokeness or Blackness or other, you know, descriptive words that are supposed to describe people who care about social change. So what would you say? And I remember you did, it might have been about 2 years ago, a piece around the messiness of sisterhood and how sometimes, you know, we ourselves are doing things or saying things that are oppressing each other while we're fighting our oppressors. So as we all, I think, are looking at things from a new lens, how do we work together in our own culture not to oppress each other as we move forward?
Yeah, well, you know, white supremacist capitalist patriarchy, that's bell hooks's formulation, has really done a number on a lot of us. I think too many of us are just fighting to advance our position in this system instead of investing ourselves in throwing all of that away and making something new, making something where we all have the ability to live and thrive. And I think that everybody's journey is different. Everybody is coming to these conversations with their own knowledge bases, with their own experiences. But I absolutely decry that hatefulness I experience in Black women's only spaces, so much bigotry. And I feel it is my responsibility to call that out. But even while I am committed to calling that out, I still want to engage other Black folks, other Black women in particular, with empathy, because I have not always been woke. Okay, this has been a journey. I have not always been there, and I know,
Right.
okay, if I can do it, if I can let go of transphobia, if I can let go of homophobia and classism, everybody else can do it too, because I'm not that special. You know, I always say that I would not be a feminist if I did not think that people can change, and I absolutely believe that if we venture out, if we invest in our liberatory imaginations, that we can absolutely do it. That anybody who really wants to do it, to come to a politic that is fundamentally rooted in justice and not domination. It just is going to take some work. It's going to take some energy, maybe some reading, other forms of learning, but we can get there.
Right. And so I just want to say to everyone, this is an exciting discussion. I'm sure some of you have questions you'd love to ask our esteemed panel. Feel free to put your questions in the comment section. I'm going to bring everyone back shortly and we will be able to ask those questions. So Kimberly, I'd love to bring in our other panelists. I still have questions that I think are relevant to everyone. So thank you for being here, and let's go ahead and bring everyone else back up. So we have us all. So I have a question for all of you that you can take as you see fit. When we look at social movements and the stages of those movements, I think that we are in a place around the second or so stage where people are emotionally vested. You know, they've been protesting day after day in cities. But sometimes we fail in these moments to get past the emotion and really get to true changes in policy and true lasting changes that are really going to accomplish those goals. So I ask all of you intergenerationally what you believe it will take for us to keep this momentum and to really leverage this moment to truly impact some of these systems and policies that are oppressing us in this nation. We can start with you, Professor.
With me? Okay.
Yes.
Well, this is, I think, the very first time in our history that the majority of white people have seemingly recognized the impact of racism, not only on Black, Latinx, Indigenous, Asian communities, but they've recognized how racism distorts and pollutes the entire country. There is no hope for democracy unless we move in the direction of racial justice. And as important as the protests were and continue to be, real lasting change will only happen as a result of persistent work of rethinking and refashioning our institutions, our economic institutions, our educational institutions, our housing, our media, and of course, our healthcare system. And that is work that does not receive media attention. That is work that does not appear to be as dramatic as going out into the streets with thousands and millions of people. But that is the work that is going to guarantee that this moment will help us move in the direction of justice and freedom in our immediate and long-term future. So wherever we are, whatever institution within which we work, we have to start that process now of transforming them.
Anyone else weighing in?
Well, I want to weigh in. When I graduated from Talladega in 1959, Dr. Martin Luther King was my graduation speaker. And he told us at that time that we could not afford to sit on the sidelines and watch things happen, that we had to be involved, that we had to get involved, and we had to stay involved. And at that time, I kind of didn't much know what he was talking about. You don't know how you sit through graduations. However, I do remember his speech, and I did know that this was, the beginning of the civil rights movement. And he is right. We have to get involved, and we have to stay involved. As Angela said, it's not glamorous work. You won't get the pats on the back for it all the time, but we need to do it. And we need to make sure that everybody we know votes. We need people to get into voting. And I'm like amazed and I find people who don't understand why they need to vote, who don't understand what has happened in order to be able to vote. We mourn John Lewis, a man whose head was cracked open on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, trying to get folks to vote. And all folks have to do is register and vote. And in some places, you can register on your cell phone. You don't even have to go anywhere. In Massachusetts, you can register on your cell phone in a second. And then you got to go vote. It's not enough to get registered. You got to show up at the polls. And we need to be showing up this time, people. We have to show up.
That's right, Billy. I would say, there's a lot of discussion about this movement and what it means, and a lot of conversation around sort of changing the way we interact with each other, changing hearts and minds, and all of that's great. However, I personally can't start with changing hearts and minds. I have to start with changing behavior. So for example, if hospitals and providers were reimbursed on the basis of Black maternal health outcomes, we would see them improve dramatically. If physicians were reimbursed on the basis of their patients with Black patients and brown patients with chronic disease did, we would see the disparities decrease. So yes, I do want people to be of appropriate hearts and minds, but I really care about how they behave. And so, Billy, to your point, Professor Davis, to your point, one way we can make sure people behave a certain way is to get the right kind of leadership in office so that we get the right kinds of policies that we need.
Great. Any thoughts, Kimberly?
Yeah, I'm going to echo what has been said a little bit. I think that we should prepare ourselves for long-term struggle. I think protests are really, really important, but we are trying to create something completely different, and that's not going to happen overnight. And so I think that when we are preparing ourselves for long-term struggle, it's important for us to understand that this stuff is not going to come from individual efforts. It's going to come through community actions. And so it's really critical that we invest ourselves in communal work, organizing, but also having hard conversations with the people we have the most access to. Everybody I know ain't radical, okay? But I am committed to pushing them and challenging them and having conversations with them about ideas that are new to them or that they might not necessarily be open to. I'm committed to doing that work because I do think it's critical that everybody in our communities understands that right now we are settling for systems that are barbaric and brutal. We don't have to live like this. And that just as we used to settle for bondage and enslavement and Jim Crow, and now we're out of that. This place that we're in right now, we can move away from, we can move out of. And yeah, I think I think the future is looking really bright. I'm actually quite excited about where we are.
Wow. Okay. Thank you for that encouragement.
Right.
Great. So another question, a question has come in, and this is similar to one that I was already going to ask you. And so there is a documentary from 1991 entitled A Place of Rage, and Black feminist poet June Jordan called upon Black activists to reclaim rage as a tool for social justice. And so while that rage is fueling that, and from women who are organizing, protesting, and attempting to maintain life, how do we give them some tools, or what do we tell them so that they don't become weary? You know, as you just said, it is a long haul. It's not overnight. What do we do so that they are not overwhelmed, depressed, and weary, and able to continue not just in this space, but in their own self space and home as well?
So I'm going to go back to that communal ethic. I think that when we assess these systems and assess the current place that we're in, it can become very daunting and overwhelming when you think that you have to go it alone, when you think that you are the only person who is experiencing the amount of weariness and fatigue. We are all in this together. So I know for me personally, I am deeply invested in communing with other people who share my politics. We encourage each other, we affirm each other, we share books and articles and podcasts with each other. We remind each other when we're feeling down that, we're making progress, slow progress, steady progress, but that is still progress, and that the aims that we desire are possible. I absolutely agree that I think self-care is possible, but not the consumption, like vapid consumption, buying things like, no, right? I think that self-care means really being in tune with how you're feeling at any given moment and honoring the needs of your body as they arise.
Yeah, and Monica, I'll just jump in and say the thing that I want us to, and this is, I think what Kimberly was saying, we need to sort of reclaim that collective outrage we felt in the 50s and 60s and before. I mean, I think about my parents and the stories they told about Black people all living in the same community. So whether you were a lawyer, doctor, school teacher, sanitation worker, you were living in the same community because you had to. There was a sense of collective rage. We were all in it together. We now know with the very significant unintended consequence of desegregation was that sense of community has been lost, and so has our health. We know that if we could eliminate segregation right now, health disparities would disappear. So I want us to go back to reclaiming that collective outrage, that sense that we're all in it together. We all stand to lose. We all stand to benefit, and what that means in terms of our work and our words and our imagery and our behavior.
Great. Well, please.
May I say something?
Absolutely.
First of all, thank you, Kimberly. Thank you, Linda. I just want to say that I'm so happy that you evoked June Jordan in this conversation. June was really before her time, and her poetic consciousness allowed her to foreshadow so much of what has happened since her death. And sometimes I feel really sad that she's not here to witness the fruits of her labor. And I want to affirm also that rage is so important, but it has to be collective rage. It can't be individual rage, because that often turns inward and it becomes destructive and not generative and productive. And June was talking about a rage that was creative, that was generative, that was productive. And I think that the thing that I learned from the Black Women's Health Project back in the day was that we cannot separate concerns about our health, our mental and physical health, from our concerns, collective concerns about the future. And so as you were saying, Kimberly, it's a collective process, and of course, everyone is going to reach a point where they get tired and experience some form of burnout. If we don't think about this individualistically, if we think about it collectively, we know that we can step back and attend to our needs, and the work continues. We
Absolutely.
have to. It took me forever to learn how important sleep is, and that I don't have to be involved in absolutely every aspect. I can trust others who embrace the same collective cause to do the work.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Wow.
And sleep is important because sleep is healing, and enough of us don't get enough sleep. And when you're not getting enough sleep, you can be real crazy. And we need everybody to be real sane and to be fully
and you don't even
present.
know it.
Right.
This is true. Well, everyone, I truly thank you for being here with us and for starting our 38th anniversary off on a high note. I am inspired to continue this work. I hope others are inspired to start or to continue wherever they are. So Kimberly, thank you. Linda, thank you for allowing my team and to do this thing we told you about. And you kind of said, oh, okay. So I appreciate you for trusting us. Thank you. For the viewers, this is just the beginning. We have a week of programming that will be as powerful as this. You can go to bwhi.org where you can see the full schedule of events and register for those free events. Our last two voices you will hear from, I'm going to be gone in a second. So thank you again for tuning in. We will have some closing remarks from both Billy Avery, our founder, and Angela Davis, our icon in residence, if you will, that will hopefully inspire you and keep you going on your journey. And so until I see you again, I implore you to be Black and well. Thank you.
Well, my sisters, this work is up to us. We cannot sit and wait for someone to come and do it for us. We have to do it ourselves. It is about us, all of us, and all of our fullness. And what I want everybody to remember is that, as Kimberly said, we don't have to have this kind of world. We can have a much different world. We deserve to have a different world. That we were all born zestful, loving, creative human beings, and we all deserve the best that there is. And we need to stop the idea of settling. We no longer want to settle. I find it very encouraging that the young people are in the forefront of this work against racism now, which is going to be one of the hardest things in the world to untangle, unpack, especially here in the racist United States of America. But it also were young people who marched in Selma. There were young people who led marches. It's always the young. There were young people in Angela Davis's hometown of Birmingham who were there when they sicked the dogs on them, when Bull Connor and them sicked the dogs on them. They sicked them on children. They sicked them on young people. My wife Gina talks about all her work and civil rights in Oklahoma City and the sit-ins and the police officers spitting on them, getting hit by sticks. Honey, all that stuff is going to come back again. This is not going to be an easy struggle. But we have to be prepared to be here for the long haul. And we were not meant to carry the load all the way by ourselves. We carry it to a certain point, and then we have others who will then carry it on, who will keep moving it. But the thing is to keep it moving, to keep it rolling forward, to keep it happening, and to know that one day, we'll overcome. We will get there, but it is going to be hard and it's going to be long, but it's something we have to do. We have to save ourselves. No one is going to save us but us. It's up to us. Over to you.
Wow, thank you, Billy. Thank you, Billy. You always inspire me. And I want to thank the organizers for inviting me to participate in this really moving and insightful program on the Black Women's Health Imperative. As a member of the Black Women's Health Project in the 1980s and the 1990s, I came to realize that the emphasis on the physical and mental and spiritual health of Black women was essential, not only for what it offered to us Black women as individuals, but what it meant for community and what it meant for prospects of radical democracy in this country. Today, the National Black Women's Health Imperative recognizes that in order for health to be acknowledged as an important priority in this country, the predicament of those who are at the very bottom of the hierarchy needs to be addressed. As Zora Neale Hurston once wrote, the Black woman is the mule of the world. Mm-hmm. When Black women's physical, mental, and spiritual health is taken seriously, that will mean that we will be moving toward a healthy and just nation and a healthy and just world. We recognize then that Black women are the backbone of movements for freedom, movements against racism and misogyny, movements against homophobia and transphobia. We learned then new vocabularies. We learned how to talk about our emotional health in the context of developing strategies for economic and political liberation. The emphasis on self-care that one can now see in relation to the amazing Black Lives Matter movement and the women who are in the leadership of that movement, that emphasis can be traced back to the pioneering work of the National Black Women's Health Project. Mm-hmm. And the work that the National Black Women's Health Imperative is now doing around maternal mortality, diabetes, hypertension, HIV, mental and emotional health, and especially reproductive justice is in the very forefront of our efforts to imagine a better future. When Black women achieve health and happiness and freedom, that will mean that the entire world will be primed to change. And so, as our sister June Jordan said in her amazing poem for South African women, we are the ones we've been waiting for.
Absolutely. Oh, thank you, my sister. Oh, my God. We are the ones. We are the ones.
And thank you, Billy.
And thank you so much. Those words were just right in our heart. It was just the thing that we need to hear at this time. I hold you dear.
And I hold you dear as well, Billy.
Okay. Ooh, okay.